Second session of Perlick is about to begin. Thank you all for coming. Thank you in the interweb land. My pleasure to introduce Tom. Thank him and the Integra team for having us here, as well as Amy from Perlick. Thank you. Take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope your lunch was good. I know mine was. So we've got some folks. Matt, you want to come up? I just want to introduce Matt Magliari. He runs Blue Sky draft beer installation. So he's one of our resident experts. So when I say I need to go check on something, I usually run back and pick his brain, find out what's true and what I think, and then what's true. So we get that worked out. And then we have Parker from our group in our sales department, and my partner Mark Carnava, and Amy from Perlick. So anyway, we're going to cover a lot of information, but this is meant to be interactive. Can you guys hear me okay back there?
Yep.
Okay, so this is meant to be interactive. So if we're talking about something and you have questions, just pipe up. Let's get it out on the table and talk about it. So it's a 2-hour session. Hopefully you only have to listen to me for an hour, and you guys have enough to carry the other hour. Interspersed, doesn't have to be all one than the other. So the first thing we're going to go over is mod bars. I don't know, do many of you in here have experience with the mod bar setups, the prefab walls, Julian? Okay, so a few of you. So we're going to cover the mod bar setups a little bit. Spend a few minutes on those, the do's and the don'ts, and things to watch out for. The modular bar system is a prefabricated die wall, and it comes attached with the assortment of underbar equipment designed in a particular project. It will arrive pre-mounted on the die wall in sections up to 8.5 feet. You set them in place, you set the others, you just line them all up, set them in place, then you come in and shoot them down through the floor. Some jobs I've seen, they've actually opened up some of the sides into the underbar, and there's some flanges along the bottom. They shoot those down as well. So whatever you can do to secure it by the means available. One thing that's real important to know when you're getting a mod bar system, it's coming in before everybody else, before the flooring, before the plumbers, before the electricians, and it's going to be set in place and locked down. So the most important thing you can do is make sure and get that covered to the degree you need to do. The electricians and the plumbers love it because it's a workstation. You know, they drop everything on there. Lighting people like to climb on it. So just know that's going in very early in the process, so you need to protect it. Cardboard, visqueen, packing covers, whatever it takes, but you gotta cover it up. Because it's going to be on the job site a month or 2 or 3 before you actually get around to finishing off the bar. There's 2 reasons why operators like the mod bar. Is the simplicity to install it. You can do it very, very quickly. And coating up the underbar, not having all the legs. It makes for a very clean application. If they're going to hose down or rinse down or do any of that, it's watertight because you're going to tile up the 6-inch kick plates. They do come out with 6-inch kick plates. The kick plates can stay on, but whoever's doing the tile, they're going to need to drill in backer board, or they can take those 6-inch kick plates off and drill in their backer board into the metals that panels drilled into. So you can do it either way. My preference is to take the kick plates off, throw them away, and then put the backer board, and then cove up to that, because then it's flush with the stainless piece above it. One of the most important things I can tell you about the mod bar is it's meant to be front accessible from the customer side. The panels slip into a slot, and there's some hooks on the back of a panel that would be made on site by the millwork folks, and then it slips right down into the front. So it's meant to be removable. If anybody needs to get in there to redo plumbing, redo electrical, if there's a leak of some sort inside and you need to get in there, that's where you get in. Everything on the front side, the server side, bartender side, everything is drilled in from the back, from the customer side. So there's no way to get it off of the die wall from the front, from the server side, from the bartender side, excuse me. The one option I always recommend is if there's a void panel. A void panel is just a straight wall panel that you'll find behind a bottle cooler, a mug froster, something that's going to roll out of the way. You take that out, you're looking at just a flat panel. They typically go all the way to the floor, and if they come in and cove up that, then you can't ever get that front panel off. Not to mention, that panel is secured from the customer side through the die wall. So a very simple option, a no-charge option, is removable die wall. Removable void panel, so that they can be taken off from the bartender side. So if there's anything, it's a great place to locate a tower. Right above, if the beer bundle and the tower's over the die wall and the beer bundle's coming into the die wall, then put the tower over a bottle cooler. Great place to do it. Because that rolls out of the way, you take that void panel in, and you've got all your connections right there on both sides, on the bartender side, and if you have a removable panel on the customer side, you can pull it off there as well. Those are some of the things you really need to take care of. Is there any questions on the mod bar, how it sets up?
Since it's going in before the flooring, so your floor finish is about ½ inch, 3/4 inch lower than what's supposed to be have?
It's generally just gone on whatever that finished floor height is, and then you just come to your thin set if it's tile, and then just cove up it. Is that answering your question?
Somewhat, yeah.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, on the customer side, when it's supposed to be accessible, that means anything that's getting finished on that side has to be removable at some point.
It should be. There's jobs we've done, some big jobs that it was not removable.
I've seen some that are fixed, when they put panels in there,
right.
People forget that they're going to service that in the future.
Right. It's really a good thing to have. That probably starts in the design phase, probably after you guys, before you guys get out there. It's probably already one way or the other. Rule of thumb is interior designers trump everybody. Pretty is most important. Usable. So this is our standard mod bar, flush to the floor. We have a couple of variations. Here, if you want to. This just shows we can do corners, we can do radiuses. We can only go so tight. And if you're putting things in that radius, you need to make sure they can handle the radius. This is a spec sheet I included into the presentation so that when this gets sent to you, if you want to pull those out, you can have those. And it shows a couple of, just shows you a little bit different variations. This is a cabinet base. This is the pedestal base right here. And in a couple slides, you'll see the pedestal base is where we pull up a lot of the beer conduits, a lot of the utilities. You don't want to pull it into here. That's a very small area, and there's really no way to work in it because this does come with the bottom. You want to pop everything up in here, and that's on the spec sheet. Right here. Yeah.
The drain lines, the ones that are to the back, or the drain connections to the back, are they running through the die wall, or are they running
through the die
cabinet?
wall. Yeah, they can go through the die wall. If it depends on where your drain's at. I mean,
Some on the side, some on the back, or some are in a dead corner or something.
Whatever makes sense. The question is, where are the drain lines?
But they lock up the front.
Some of the fronts, if you can see on our die wall here, when you're on a pedestal, this front panel does come off, so you can look at it from the front. Obviously, on a cabinet base, you have a full cabinet with a bottom, so you can't see anything there. But on these pieces, that whole front comes off. You can see it here. That unscrews and comes off, so you can get in there. And whatever makes sense. If there's a floor sink, it's closer to run the drain straight to the floor sink. There's no reason that it has to route through the dining room. It's just there if you need it. And know that if there's a tower going on top of this die wall, that tower has to have unfettered access from the bottom to the top because they're going to run trunk bundles to mount from the tower down. There's some variations to that, but that's one of the things you gotta be aware of is real estate, like always, First guy in takes the best real estate. In particular, if they've got a vent pipe, the vent pipe's gonna run right underneath this top, and if that's where your tower's supposed to go, then you've got a problem. Something's gonna have to change, and they're probably gonna have to move the tower back off of that die wall, and now the bundle's gonna run surface mount on the face of the die wall, which now means you need a chimney somewhere so you can get it through there down to the floor. Here's all the cutouts. You can see the beverage line for the beer here, electrical up on top. In certain instances, we have some modifications that we do on those. We have one job where we know there's going to be a vent pipe. We're actually putting a 3-inch diameter hole up on top. And we also know that there's going to be a top mount beer tower going right there. So now we have a problem. Good news is we know about it now, still in the design phase. What we did is we created a 10-inch deep die wall. So now we'll have two 3-inch diameter holes running down the middle, and then there'll be enough room on the bartender side to mount the tower and get those beer bundles down through next to that vent pipe. But because we knew that going in, we're able to correct that early on. We run into that situation, and something has to move. And if it has to have a vent pipe, it's got to be the beer system. Beer comes back, and now you got to get the bundle through the underbar, which means somebody's going to be creating a chimney.
Can you go back one slide?
Absolutely.
On those 3 bases there, the flat wall, where's my code base on the interior side of that?
On where?
Yes, right there.
Huh?
Yes, where's my code base at?
There's no code base on that. So that's the void
The
panel.
void panel there?
Yeah, so my recommendation is in all my specs, in any job I quote or am involved in, whether it's asked or not, I just put a removable void panel. So what that does is that means you get a 6-inch section with nothing on it. And then this panel up here is removable.
So you got the 6-inch section for your base?
Right. Otherwise, in that setup like we have here, you would have to cove up that whole thing 6 inches, and then that panel's locked in. You
Right.
can't ever take it down unless you get fabricator on site to cut it. In the back?
On the base cabinet, and you said this is particularly should be going in prior to your stop outs and all those things. If my job site have stop outs already, and if for some reason it ends up on a cabinet, not on the thickness of the bar die, I might be able to bend my water supply and conduit and just bring it inside the wall.
Yeah, so the question is, what if there's already utilities mounted on site and some of them are stepped up in a place not conducive for the installation? Yeah, the whatever trade that is, if it's plumbing, they're gonna have to put a elbow on it and turn it to get it somewhere where they can use it. And I might add that we do have available on the front end with quotation, again, for nominal fee, they make a Mylar template that will lay out exactly how the bar is going to sit. And that can be shipped out a couple of days after the PO arrives. So that can be on site if there's any trades that have concerns about their stub-up locations.
On the other 2 bases, the cabinet base and the pedestal base, do those come as part of the die wall?
Yeah. Yeah, and then the underbar sits right on top. So this is typically an ice chest. And then this side is the cabinet bases.
What do you base, go base up
Yeah,
around all of that?
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so normally I would say most of these panels are just going to get taken off and thrown away. There's a framework in there. Because remember, if there's a void panel going next to your cabinet base, you've got to coat the sides also.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Eric? So some variations, we make them in a variety of ways. I think we have, the standard is with the underbar on the ground and the die wall on the ground. And from there, we start making modifications. I'm not sure why someone would do it this way, other than it's easier to mount. It's just having a prefab die wall. Same type of setup. On a curve. And this is the only other variation I've sold, is you have everything flat on the ground, and then you have one where the die wall is actually going on a curve, and then the rest of the equipment is all the way to the ground. All the same rules apply. All the front panels come off, you still cove up here, and now you're just coving up that curb. And depending on the codes, I don't know if that is a 4 inch is going to be acceptable, if it's a part of the foundation, or if that needs to go to 6. That's kind of a detail that's worked out, you know, elsewhere. I had that requested one time, and we did have an issue with that, because you start getting into the cutouts. Obviously, that cutout goes the whole length of the die wall. So we can't necessarily go up 6 inches. So for right now, we're stuck at 4. So if somebody wants to do a 6 inch high curb, we have to go back to engineering and see if we can do that, because that changes the die wall quite a bit. Might just have to raise this up and take it off the top. Any other questions on mod bar? I think we're about done with that. Always, if it's a mod bar and it's a front mount beer tower, just be aware on how the trunk lines are going to get from the bottom up. Oftentimes they'll come up in that pedestal base, then sweep into the die wall to go where it needs. But just make sure that the trades aren't running straight up from bottom to top. If there's any horizontal movement on the beer lines, you just have to have room for it. This was a, conduit was almost in the perfect spot. Tower's going over here. Bundle's over here. This is obviously not a prefab die wall. That was done on the job site. And the beer bundle's on the wrong side. There's no access through this wall. And then you got an electrical panel right where we need to start swinging up. So ultimately what happened, you know, if you're out there early enough and you spot these things, the electrician moved his box over to here, and then they had to cut out this much of the frame, and we were able to get the job in. Those are the things you want to look at when you find the beer tower on the front bar. This was the same thing. We had some issues with the 2x4s. They had to move a few of them so that we could mount the big bridge tower. And that's the thing with the bridge tower. Oftentimes you have leads coming out both sides, so you need a pretty wide footprint to get down. Occasionally, depending on how big it is, we can get the leads out of one side. So if you're going over a particular area, maybe on the back bar, and you got a refrigerator here, in the cabinet here, maybe we could get all the leads left and come into the cabinet, stub up over there. Given it's the front bar, a lot more trades working in there. This is, whether this is mod bar or not a mod bar, that tower is not going in the die wall. It's going to be surface mount to the bartender side, and there's no chimneys on the equipment. So my recommendation always, if you see a tower on the front bar, is to take a look at your elevations and see if there's chimneys to get the conduits down, or decide, are they going in the die wall. The other thing that happens, they decide to have them in the die wall and they stub up outside the die wall. So you got the bundle coming up outside the die wall, you got the tower going in the die wall, and nobody made any modifications to get the two together. So we started asking for a big cutout, and the GCs look at you like you got 3 eyes. It's like, they got to meet. Give me some room. But those are the things you guys, you know, you're out looking at this stuff early on. Those are the things to look out for. This is one that was almost perfect. You notice the blue tape? That wall was completely sealed. And the contractor's idea was we were going to come at it from the customer side, magically get through all these pipes, pull that line up, get their hands up into here to make the connections, and get the crimpers and wrap the tape in insulation. So obviously we couldn't do that. So Matt put the tape on there, they came out and cut it out, and then we were able to do the insulation. And I believe they did a removable.
They put a stainless cover over that.
Yeah, so that if you want to get in there again, the customer doesn't have to rip everything out. Okay, so now we're kind of into the beer part of the presentation. Is there anything going on the mod bars you have questions on? Okay. We spend a lot of money, we meaning the customer, to get the beer from the walk-in out to the tower to pour the beer. And the only thing you're trying to do is get the beer out at 37, 38 degrees, 1 gallon per minute, with the same CO2 pressure as the keg was racked at. That's what all this stuff is to do, to get the beer out to the front at the right pressure, the right temperature, at the same pressure that it was racked at. That's all we're trying to do, just pour beer. Because it's saturated with CO2, we got to keep the CO2 in the liquid to get it out in a way that the customer can drink it. Obviously, glass full of beer don't do anybody any good. So that's the main goal. So the single biggest question you can ask an operator today, wasn't like this 5 years ago or 10 years ago, is what are you going to dispense? Because it's a 6 faucet tower or a 12 faucet tower. Happens a little bit more often in the direct draws than the long draws. But what are you going to dispense? The beer system, it's a beer tower. It's got beer components. It's got 12 faucets. Most everybody's assuming this is a 12 flavor beer system. How often do we get out there now? It's 3 beers, 4 wines, 2 mixed cocktails, kombucha, and we have another new one that's really great, milk. Actually, it's 2 milk lines, a milk and a chocolate milk. They want to know what's going to happen. I have no idea. Never done long draw milk. Next month, I can answer that, but I don't know what's going to happen today. When you think about it, I don't know why it won't work. The temperature's right. The big concern we have is at the cooling block. The beer sits for any length of time, is that milk going to freeze at the cooling block? I don't know. I don't think so, but we have a little bit of temperature range we can play with. I think it'll probably work, but there's no way to know until we start doing it. And they're literally going to do long draw milk and long draw chocolate milk. I still don't get it. And I think they're talking about cleaning those lines every night. So that means, 2 lines of milk down the drain every night. And the byproducts from milk prevents those lines from being used from anything else ever again. Some in the proteins and whatever's left over, no matter how long they've been dry, is not going to be good for anything going forward. So, but that's, oh, by the way, you did know that we're not pouring just beer, right? It's like, no, we had no idea. Everybody thinks it's the same system. It's not. We could push the beer with CO2. That'd be fun. You have sparkling milk, sparkling chocolate milk. So we got to change not everything, but most everything. The tower should have been built a little bit different. But that's the question you need to ask. Single most important question when you get out there, get hold of anybody that knows what's going on, is what are you going to dispense? Because the sooner we know that, the sooner we can start changing everything that you've already bought. And then it's just a matter of how much we're going to change. Because if it's wine, we really should have stainless steel towers. All the components should be stainless, 304 stainless. So a lot of different things to consider. So the walk-in cooler. Go back to that other. There we go. So this is a typical cooler, and these have beer pumps, and this is set up kind of wrong. So one of the things with beer pumps is you have to put straight CO2 on the keg at a pressure that will drive the beer out of the keg up to the pumps. And that lift is about 5 feet, maybe 6 feet, before you start having to put so much pressure on the keg that you're overcarbonating it to get it up to 8 feet. That extra 2 feet is a big deal. So now you're putting too much CO2 pressure on the keg, and you're going to start having foaming issues. When you're using a pump system, you're only putting enough CO2 pressure on the keg to drive the beer to the pump. And then the other part of the CO2 equation is driving the pump pressure. So you can have 40 PSI, 50 PSI, pushing the pump to send the beer a long way. But when that beer goes through the pump, you're not putting any more CO2 into the beer. There's diaphragms in the pump that just push it out. You hear it going ka-thump, ka-thump, ka-thump. That's a technical expression. And it drives it out to however far you want to go. So these are up too high. Now, if you're doing a mixed gas, you can go up as high as you want because you're actually pressurizing the keg, and you can all factor that into the equation. The biggest issue with that is your shelving. That's always the issue. You know, I want to put my pumps from the bottom of the keg to the center line on the pump. The best place for a pump is 60 inches from the bottom of the keg, 5 feet. We have gotten okay to go up to almost 6 feet. That's about the limit. That puts the bottom part of this panel right about at the top of the keg. And everybody's always uptight about that, but these are not an interruption of the walk-in. These are kind of the heart of what you're doing in the walk-in. Because without these, you don't get there. So that has to be part of the equation. If there's an operator you know that says they want those things up top, then we don't use the pumps. We use blended gas with a blender and regulator pumps. Those can go as high as you want. Because when you take blended gas, you're taking nitrogen and CO2, you're blending it together, and you're pressurizing the keg to drive the beer. So you can drive it up however far you want to a point, but you can certainly get to the top of the walk-in. So if there's an operator that's been doing a lot of systems and they want it up high, then we just stay away from the bumps and we go to a blended system. The only thing with a blended system is you have finite preferences on temperature and pressure. So a 60-40 blend, 60% CO2, 40% nitrogen, is designed for about 28 to 31 PSI. So if you're pushing it in a distance or a height that fits within that 28 to 31 PSI, you're good. If all of a sudden you get a 60-40 blend, and now they change the walk-in location, now it's 300 feet, now all of a sudden that 60-40 blend doesn't work. Sometimes the 60-40 blend doesn't work when the beer gets up to 40 degrees because it falls outside of that 28 to 31 PSI. Everything's relevant, everything's tied together. So one of the reasons I like pumps a little bit more is they make up for some issues. If it gets a little warm, you can push a little harder, pack the beer in the line. It overcomes some of the things that happen inside the walk-ins. Both systems work great. One takes a little more finesse, and on occasion we've had to send back a 60-40 blender to McDanon to have them rework it and change it into a 70-30. Okay, so you've got these come in, this is a dual blender, so this has a nitrogen in, oxygen in, and then 2 blends out.
CO2.
What did I say?
Oxygen.
Ooh.
Don't do that.
Ooh. CO2 in, nitrogen in, and then blended gas out. And you can have 2 settings. One is usually a 75-25 for Guinness or heavy stout. And then the 60-40 is for all the other beers. Like I said, it could be a 70-30 blend, it could be a 65-35, and all those things are relevant to what the temperature is on the job site, what's going on. Beer systems are best in dedicated keg walk-ins. The problem with half keg walk-in, half food walk-in is people are in and out all day long. They're warming up the walk-in because they don't want to screw up the produce. And now all of a sudden you got kegs at 42 degrees and they're blowing foam. So most of the new construction generally have keg coolers, not always. So that's the CO2 mix. That's the blender, and then that was a nitrogen generator that we can actually provide. Okay, so the high pressure. Go back. The blended systems have two areas of concern. One, they max out at about 300 feet. And again, it all has to do with pressures. How high it is, how warm it is. The rule of thumb is about 300 feet. If it's a high pressure situation where you use a lot of pressure, it might only be 200 feet. The biggest reason is the keg couplers. Is it 50 or 55?
It depends on the model. It should say on the tag, but there's
I
a
can see
safety
that.
valve on that.
Yeah, so there's a safety valve here. You get above, I think it's 50 PSI. They're always on. When you gotta turn it back and forth, 50 PSI. So this one's 50 PSI. So you can go up to about 45, 47 PSI. So if the lift or the distance is beyond 50 PSI, this coupler's not gonna work. This relief valve is gonna pop and it's gonna let it all go. So that's the limit on the blended gas. The pumps, when you gotta go out 500 feet, it's really the only option. They can go up to 600 feet if it's the right temperature and it's all flat. Again, it's all based on pressure. This is what you would call a low pressure system. Everything is downhill. Nothing is going up above the walk-in. And the theory is you can push this with straight CO2 if it's 75 feet or less. I'm not real wild about it. I would still rather put pumps or a blender on it. Because if the temperature changes a little bit or the pressure changes a little bit, you're getting foam. There's nothing you can do to make corrections. So if we got a blender or a pump on it and it's a little foamy, if the temperatures are a little bit at that high end, you can turn them up a little bit, pack it in the lines, and you're okay. So if somebody's going 5 or 10 feet, I might go straight CO2. Outside of that, I don't want to do it because I don't want you getting a call on Friday night because I know you're going to call me next. So, no, really, I'm just concerned about you guys. This is a high pressure system, you're going up. And then so this is one of the things that we do on every Perlick beer system that goes out there, is we have our installer go out and get measurements, get dimensions, so that we know how far it's going and the lift. So they design the PSI specifically for that job. Yep. Just another setup, and I think that's the last one. Go again. We do have another one that's downhill, so the walk-in set. Again, it's not a big deal. We just got to take care of the negative lift. And oddly enough, sometimes when you have negative lift, it requires more pressure. So if you have something falling downhill and going to turn and come up into a tower, you got to pack it. Otherwise, the beer tumbles and it kind of separates. CO2 comes out. All kinds of little weird things. Mechanical blender and our nitrogen regulator. Nitrogen beer, I mean, that's usually a blended, like I was talking about, 75, 25. 75 nitrogen, 25 CO2. Some guys might put in straight nitrogen, but generally it's a blended. The beer pumps we've talked a little bit about, but this is kind of the size beer pump panel I like. I like the two pump panels. Because most of the time, when you see a two-pump panel, you see two gauges, you figure one gauge for each pump, and that's not the case. So the air comes in here. This valve controls the pressure to the two kegs. Got two lines here. Two pressures to the kegs, probably 13 to 14 PSI, because that's what the kegs are racked off at the brewer. And then this pressure is what it's going to take to run the beer out to the tower. So this pressure is going to control both of these pumps. So if I have a 4-bank pump panel, you still only get 2 controllers. So now I got one controller feeding all the gas to the 4 kegs, and then I have one setting for 4 pumps. So all 4 beers need to be going to about the same place because they're getting the same pressure. Now we do have some latitude, so if one of them's going 50 feet, one's going 100, one's going 150, one's going 200, we're going to pressurize it for 200. And then at the tower, we're going to restrict everything back down to get back to the desired result of what we first talked about. 1 gallon a minute delivered at the pressure that it was brewed with. So sometimes you get some of these little craft beers, and they will have different types of CO2 content. And when you get something that's like 8, I don't even know what the measurement is. It's blocks of CO2. It's done with 8 psi.
Volumes, yeah.
Yeah, volume, 8 volume. It's pushes differently than something at 13 or 14. So you can't have those hooked on the same pressure source. It doesn't happen very often, but it happens occasionally. Our trunk bundles. I don't know if you guys have seen these cut, but that's what they look like. And the whole point of the trunk bundle is to take the beer from the walk-in to the tower and keep it at the same temperature it was stored at. It's not designed to pull down temp. It's designed to deliver whatever it's stored at. So if you got 45 degrees in the walk-in, you're going to deliver a nice foamy beer at 45 degrees at the other end. So you generally want the beer stored at 37 to 38 degrees, and we will transport it from point A to point B and keep it at that condition. And it's going to pour great when it comes out the other end. This is a different type of bundle. This is a poly line. The Perlick always puts in their Century systems the copper lines. And some of our competitors say, oh, they're outdated. Poly lines are just as good. And they're easier to install. They're a little easier to install, but these are still not all that flexible. They have filament tape, barrier tape, and then Armaflex around it. So these are still very, it's tough to get them through. The insulation is a little bit thinner. But my point is, if the copper isn't better, then why aren't all refrigeration systems? Who puts in a refrigeration line set of poly? Refrigeration Unlimited, Omni, any of those guys? No, they don't do that. How about coils? When was the last coil you saw with poly lines in the coil? How about fans with poly? No, that's usually galvanized, I think. Galvanized or aluminum? I think it's galvanized. They do the fins in galvanized, set by the coast, and they coat them. So the point is, everything we send out is touching a glycol line. Filament tape to it, barrier tube tape. That's the name of the game. You can't go a couple of feet without contact, without creating some hot spots. And if it gets hot, it releases the CO2. CO2 doesn't go back in because it's touching cold again down the road. It's out, it's staying out. So to illustrate that, here's a double wrap. So everything up to 12 flavors on Perlick, you get 2 copper lines. When you go beyond that, you get a double wrap. So you've got 2 sets of copper lines, but you can just see how every beer line is taped and touching a copper line. And it's that way all the way up through the base of the tower, into the cooling block, and the shank that the faucet goes into is touching the cooling block. That's why the Perlick faucets are always sweating, because they're cold. And where moist air meets cold, it sweats. It's just laws of nature, not Perlick nature, but. And all the time we get asked, how thick is the 16-line tubing? Well, I didn't look it up, so I don't really know, but we're going to call it 5.5 inches today. So the first thing that goes through everybody's mind is 5.5 inches, a nice round diameter, going to go right into conduit. But if you can look at that, it's not round. And when you get into the 12-line bundles, they're not as round. They're more round than that. Not quite as round as this one. So one of the biggest challenges we have is getting those bundles out from the walk-in to the tower. It's either going through underneath I didn't even see that last time. So you gotta look at them once in a while. Yeah, I lied. I said we had a dozen guys running around with tape. They still think that because I never clarified it. There's actually oh, it's back. There's a machine down there that sits there and straps these things together. It just rolls them. It's really kind of trippy. And so that's how it's done. One of the things that they have to do is because we do branches in our line. So if we got 2 6-faucet towers and you just want to use one conduit, we'll run a 12-line bundle with a branch. And you actually can run it backwards. And then you go 6 go here, and then the branch, other 6 go to this one, and then the 12 goes back to the walk-in. These branches are handmade. I don't know if that's actually a branch or another bundle coming down. But those branches are made at the factory, and we give them the dimensions so they put the branches where they're supposed to be. Where it's most important is in the stadiums, where you have 6 2-faucet towers on a front counter. So what they'll do is they'll create a manifold. How many did I say? 5? Okay, we'll go with 5. So 6. I said 6. So we'll start with 6 faucets, 6 towers with 2 faucets each. So we have 12 lines coming in, and they just split 2 here, split 2 here, split 2 all the way down to the end. And then you bring in the main line and you tie the 2 together. Or it can all be one piece and you just work backwards. You feed it that way and these 2 go in over here. But most of the time they come in different pieces. Which leads me to the next point, is we don't tee the lines. We don't take one beer line to between 2 towers and then do a tee and go up to the faucets. There's not enough volume in those lines that if both of them pull their handles, you're going to run out of beer. And then you're going to have 2 lines with air in it, and you got to repack them both. And then the real nightmare is when you try and get the glycol lines split to run with those lines. You end up with this big, gigantic whatever, and things going crossways. And if something misses a glycol line, that line's just going to foam forever. So we Y. We can Y in the walk-in. So if we have 1 keg, we can take 1 keg and feed 2 faucets. Come out of the keg, and then we put a Y up there, and then you have 2 lines. But they're home runs from the walk-in all the way out to the 2 towers. We can do that. So what I had mentioned, single most important question you can ask today is what?
What are you serving?
We got a winner. I got prizes. $10 in and out. That doesn't suck. And if nobody gets them right, I get to keep both of these. Okay, so the bundles can go underground or overhead, and we need to know that. And it changes sometimes. It's really weird. It's designed one way. How it ends up being another way on a job site after it's all done is beyond me. But that's our world. And if we didn't have those changes, they could have robots doing our job. Please get a robot. So it's either underground or overhead. If it's underground, we need to make sure that it was put in to specification. Voila. 24-inch radius. We'll go over that in a minute. Let's go back to the last one. So this is, you see these at different places, Yard House, a lot of the brew houses. And I don't know if you guys have looked up inside these boxes and wonder what the hell the beer guys do up in there. That's what they do. They come down with the main line and they split them. Again, we don't tee them, but we split them. And that's what you see once you get up there. They go down into each section because those big brew pipes and those kind of things have 2 legs, so they each have leader lines coming in and out. Again, if you happen to be in a situation where you want all of them out one side, sometimes we can do that. Again, that happens usually on the front end when we're doing the design up front. Hopefully we know that. We did have a job recently that we weren't told that they had put a refrigerator right where one of the line sets was coming down. So we had to find another one with all the leader lines coming out the other side. So anyway, that's some of the stuff we do up in there. Again, plumber pipes, that's a real short radius. That's not a 24-inch suite. That's not going to work. They won't go. They just don't go. And we've had GCs, well, I need you guys to help pull. It's like, yeah, we can pull. We can just pull a bunch of, remnant when we get it out. We get some conduit, a couple of veer lines, everything's ripped up, cracked, bent. We just can't make that turn. So when you see plumber turns, or we got the 245s, gotta love those, they don't work. We can't get them through. And the first thing anybody says, well, can't you try? Yeah, who's paying if we break them? The bundles, not the pipes. But they need to put them into specification. So this is an underground spec. It's important to note that this is valid even overhead, with the exception you're not running PVC overhead. It's going to be some type of metal. But the PVC doesn't meet smoke or fire or some of those things. But you still got to have the 24-inch radius. Now we have been asked, I don't have room for that radius because I wanted to get one of those in here. You may have already seen them on site, but that 24-inch radius, that's a big ass thing. That's another technical term. It's very large. And sometimes they can't go deep enough to bury it. Well, you can cut it off here. You don't have to use the whole radius. You just got to stub it up, cut it at an angle, and you can use part of the radius. I had that pretty regular been popping up. What do? I can't get them deep enough. Well, bury it as far as you can and just keep the radius and cut them. Cut it halfway through the turn. It's not that we need that whole piece, it's just we need that radius. That was done good. That was done well. Inside the walk-in, just next to the ramp, you see we've got, go back. Got the monitor. There we go. CO2 monitor. The one where there's no outlet to plug in. Yeah. Yeah, it needs a 115 volt. So designers, reps, specifiers have to do a better job of indicating a 115 outlet. You can bury it in the panel. I mean, walking manufacturers will do that. Wherever we decide to, be tucked, over here's a good spot, 18 inches off the floor. Then we got the oops, missed it by that much. Like that never happens. My favorite's coming up, the peekaboo. There we go. So there's two things wrong with that. Number one, there's somebody seemed to put a wall pam on top of it. And number two, it's cut to grade level. That thing's gonna be filled with water within probably 2 weeks. Be foaming in 4 weeks. Everybody's saying, what's going on? Because that water goes down there, that water is not gonna be at the right temp, it's just gonna suck all that cold out. And I'm really sorry to say, but we were able to pull the line through that. It was like a 4-line bundle. They actually got it through. It's kind of bad because it's really gonna be flooded before long.
I think they hacked the wall up too.
Huh?
I think they cut up the wall.
Yeah. I mean, they foamed it, they did all they could, but it lasts for, okay, maybe it's gonna be longer than 2 weeks, but it's gonna flood. So now, any questions on conduits, the runs?
What's the most you can cut the 24-inch radius, like half the amount?
It doesn't matter,
Really?
just whatever fits the job, as long as we have the radius.
There may need to be some discussion at the time, depending on the situation.
Come down here, man.
I'm just thinking like, kind of like with the peekaboo, you're right up against the
Yeah.
stud right there. You cut it pretty shallow, you're not gonna have much in your bend.
Can you back up to the one where they missed the curve? So there is a limit. Like that one, they broke up the slab and they dug down like 3 feet and they cut it off pretty much on center with the curve.
Okay.
And then they left it like that. And there was a hole that went down in the ground like 3 feet and they poured back up to it. And there was a section of the radius down there somewhere. But
That was the full sweep, right?
no, and it wasn't accessible, and it was a cut radius terminating into a chimney in the concrete. So that was really not acceptable. And
My presumption is we're all on the same page, that you're gonna give me 4 inches above the floor. But apparently we can't assume those things because the GC decided to leave that cement hole there.
The end stem location has to be in the same spot.
and you have to be able to work with it,
Right.
pull something like that through it without accidentally folding this over or damaging the line to the side.
Okay.
So, yeah, within reason.
So you're saying they cut it back to the curb and then you had to 90 it from there even though?
Well, yeah, what they ended up doing is they jackhammered everything and part of the curb out and went straight down, because this radius was, 2 feet underground where they hacked it off. And then they just left it there. And they backbored everything up to the curb, so the conduit was down there, it just didn't actually step up to the ground anymore.
Yeah.
That thought never occurred to me. But it is, I guess, 4 inches above the floor.
Kind of, yeah. Anyways,
Okay.
yeah, within reason.
There was,
Can you talk about what size conduit? you
yes,
use for-
absolutely. So, actually, go back to the conduit suite. All the way back. Right there. So one of the things we do is we want to, Perlick offers an absolute 100% performance guarantee. So what that means is we need to know for a fact we can do something, which limits the flexibility on how far you can save. For example, 6-inch conduit for 9 lines or less. 8-inch conduit for 10 lines to 12 lines. So the question is, can you get 12-line bundle through a 6-inch conduit? A lot of times, yeah. A lot of times. If they put in this to spec, which is one 24-inch radius sweep going down and one 24-inch radius sweep going up, and you got 100 feet in between, we can pull a 12 line through that. But if they got this jog in the middle, now we think we can pull the 12-inch line through, but we're not sure we can get the 12-inch line through. We can do it up to the point that we can't do it. And there's no absolute way to tell you what that is, because every time these things are installed, if they're not, they can be installed so differently. But I can tell you, if you give me a 24-inch sweep going down, a 24-inch sweep coming up, and a 100-foot straight, we can pull a 12-inch line through that. But we can't put it in writing because we know someone's going to put a little S-turn in there or something. So that's kind of the nuanced part of it. You know, we put in writing what we absolutely know we can do, and then there's a pretty fair margin of error in things we can do beyond that. So that's as clear as mud, I understand. But does that answer it at all? And if you get into over the 12 line, you definitely should go to an 8-inch conduit. And we've done a lot of jobs where it's a 12-line bundle and 8s were specified. You're not doing bad by doing that. I know Matt sometimes would rather pull through a 6-inch conduit than an 8-inch conduit in certain situations.
The radiuses get so large.
Matt?
Excuse me for 1 second.
So I just said that
So-
at times, an installer would rather pull a conduit through a 6-inch radius than an 8-inch radius. So Matt's going to explain why.
So a 12-inch line isn't necessarily much larger than this. And going into a 6-inch conduit, it's more similar to this. This has more insulation on it.
Quick show.
So this is 3.25 inches in diameter. 12-inch might be, 12 product might be a ½ inch bigger in diameter. The radius is usually more about guiding the line through the sweep as it's being pulled, making sure it doesn't get stuck or break or fold in half. It has to get there, but it has to work when it gets there. So the 12 product actually will pull through a nice 6-inch conduit very well because it's being guided nicely through the conduit. You make the conduit 3 times the size. A 12 product line, if it's having a problem pulling through, there's enough room for it to go through and then get bent up as someone pulls. And then it can go through a few inches and get bent up as someone pulls. So it's hard to say when it's better to have a conduit slightly on the smaller side than what's spec'd, but it is possible for something like this to be so difficult to pull, someone's damaging it just pulling it by hand. So if it's going through a pipe that's 10 or 12 inches in diameter, and someone on one end yanking really hard, you can actually fold the copper over and kink it. Whereas the 12 product may actually be a really good fit for the 6-inch. It's just, there's that little problem where getting one sweep down and one sweep up almost is never the case. So if you have a turn in the middle or an offset or something, you may plan for a 12-inch and a 6-inch, and it probably won't for now. So bottom line is, the larger the conduit gets, there's more room for things to move.
And get wedged.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of art, a little bit of science. Now, if it was more science, we could be more absolute. But it's rare that we don't get our conduits through. It's only when the conduits, it's rare that we don't get our bundles through the conduit. It's only when the conduits are grossly wrong. I mean, it's the wrong size. They put the plumber 45s. Yeah, they just don't go. If they've been put in right with the right sweeps and things, I'm renting out Casconi. We did stacked, and we did, what is it, 10 or 12 beers to start in a 6-inch conduit. It was 82 feet, 8 inches, perfect sweeps down, perfect sweeps up. And they were selling so much beer, they wanted to take that out and put 16 in. A 16-inch conduit and a 16-inch, 16-line bundle and a 6-inch conduit. Just, no way, can't happen. Let's try it. Okay, John. So we take the 16 and we wrap it up and we go down there. We pulled and we got it 84 feet. It came out about that far, and we had what's his name, Will. Will's about 6'6", 290 on one end, and we got it in. But if it had been 85 feet, it wouldn't have poked through. Right, John?
Right.
Stack that 16-line bundle. And
Twice in one day, you reference that.
so we got it in there, and but literally, if it had to go another foot, it wasn't going. So that's the art of it. But John was there when they put the pipes down. He knew that they were good sweeps down and a sweep up, no jogs in the middle, and it was a good owner. So let's take a roll, and if all else fails, then we haven't heard. It is what it is, and we got that in. But they were put in. When things are put in right, you can test the limits. It's when it's buried and you don't know if it's in right. Our rule of thumb is when they can't get their fish tape through the faucet conduit, there's a problem. And that happens too. It's like, I don't know what they did under there, but it's not right. Then crazy. They go back downstream and some guy, no, I just had to jog around that one piece. It's like, unjog it. So, all right, where are we at now? I think we're at the towers.
That we are.
All right, so we run these beer lines with the conduit, comes out of the walk-in, run the glycol through, everything's touching all the way through the leader lines, and we'll go over that in just a second, up to the tower, and that glycol runs through this cooling block and keeps everything nice and cold. That's why we get, this is deja vu all over again. We just did this, didn't we? And it keeps everything cold, keeps the faucet sweating, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. So wait a minute. Okay. So when we're at the tower, we need to have access. For me, is it on the front bar or the back bar? In my world, I sell the stuff, so what do I know? Matt's the one that lives with it out in the field, but I've always encountered more problems on the front bar. You got a lot of trades, a lot of small area, and the beer lines are always the last to go in. Maybe not the beer lines, but the connections, because we can't really do anything until the countertop's in, or the bar top, and then the holes are drilled, and then we come on out, and the plumber's been in, the electricians have been in. In fact, the plumber's already mad at us because he can't finish up the job because he's got to run the drain line to the drainer. It's the only thing left he's got on the whole job. So I find more problems there than anywhere else. So again, when you get on a job, there's a tower on the front bar. Is the tower going into the die wall, or is the tower and bundle mating up on the face of the wall. And if it is, check to see if there's a chimney. There's got to be a way to get it through the stainless to connect with the tower. It's in the die wall. Do we have access? For me, when it's on the front bar, one of the first things on the die wall, the first thing I'm thinking about, what kind of tower is it? Is it a tower that mounts from the top down? Like this tower? T-tower? Been around forever? You got four holes on the top, it just drills right down. No problem. Easy. Making the connections, different story. But then you get, if you have a tower like this goes down, and now we got this nut that comes off. Now we got to get under, it's got to go through the tower, through the counter, through whatever die wall or wherever we're going, and then we got to get up underneath there to tighten this down. Now, and if it's going in the die wall, you got to have access to get your hands in there. And then even worse than these are the big blue pipes that have 5 or 6 nuts on the top, and you got the big nuts on the bottom. You got to get up underneath there. If somebody wants to put it on a 4-inch die wall and the diameter of that base is 6 inches, now you're trying to fight where these blasted screw holes are going to go. And how are we going to get in there to get the connections in? And again, we're the last ones there, so all the drain lines are in. All the electricians are in, vent pipes are in. So that's what you got to look at. When you're on a job site, if they're on the front, those are the things you got to pay attention to. The chimney is one of the biggest things, because more jobs than not, from what I've been involved with, the trunk bundle comes up in the floor and it's mounted on the face of the die wall, not in the die wall. And so often when you look at an elevation, there's just equipment all the way across and there's no chimney put in there. Well, from a sales standpoint, I should see that really early on. And if I don't, shame on me. Designers should look and recognize the same thing. And if it's mounting on the surface of that die wall and you got a bottle cooler, you can make it work, but the bottle cooler is going to be sticking out about 4 inches now. So those are the things you want to look at. You get out early on the job when you get your plan sets. One of the first things, as far as that part of it, I know you guys got 100 things to look at. Ventilation, you know how you do it. But it's a good thing you only have 2 or 3 jobs going at once. I cracked myself up. All right. I'm here for my own entertainment. He's come out here all week. What else? Back counter. You know, we want to come up in cabinets. You know, so we can make our connections. It's not uncommon to see these stub ups coming up underneath a back bar refrigerator. Like, actually, I think that violates NSF. I don't know that you can run a drain line straight out of a cabinet into something like that. I've been told you can't. I don't know that for a fact. But let's just pretend now that the codes have nothing to do with it. And by God, that's what we're going to do. We're going to run that right. So you just lost this whole refrigerator door. It's gone because we're making connections. And you can't use it for anything else. Maybe you can put some bobbles around the connections, but if that's really where they want to do it, then they need to take one section off that refrigerator and put in a cabinet. Because we need about 18 inches to get crimpers going, to get around so that we can make the connections. Because this is what we're doing. Matt, you want to come up here and go over this? He's better at it than I am. He lives with this stuff. But we got the copper lines, we got the beer lines.
Most of the basic hand tools that are being used on this kind of rotate around. So there were some pictures earlier. How far back would you have to scroll to get to like the towers that were already mounted on die walls, cutouts, things? That actually wasn't a bad one right there with the cabinet and the single line. Go forward a couple. No, that one. So that was a millwork cabinet, and that was just a line stubbing right out of the conduit to a tower a foot away. That's great. We don't always get 3 feet of space that's usable that has nothing else in there. But you also can't have a 4-inch space. Somehow there has to be tools in there to work. This has to be insulated. You can't pull the lines bare. You can't just install them to sit out there and sweat. There will be mold and things growing on it. before too long. And if this gets wet, this won't work anymore. You'll have a hot spot. The beer won't pour. So all of this has to have access for someone to work on it. Tom mentioned before the contractor thought we could just come in from a 10-inch gap on the opposite side of the wall and get that installed. There's no way. Someone has to be working in this whole area to make that connection happen. Same thing as this on the floor here.
Pull that up. And then go over the restrictions.
Yeah. So this is more or less what's in that slide. And for someone to connect this, they're getting into this area here and working all the way down to where the trunk is split.
Let's spin it. Go to the CBU. So this is how we get the glycol to run back and forth right up here. Is the U there? Yeah.
Yep.
Two sets of glycol lines, two sets of glycol lines. One goes back, and then the other two loop together. That's where we have to tie in all the glycol lines so that everything is touching beer lines everywhere.
Yeah.
What he said.
So if someone gets sloppy in the connection, or if there's issues going on with the bar die wall or the bar top, and someone were to come in and not do a good job making the connection because of space constraints or something, a 10-inch gap, a foot, 2 feet, something that's not touching the refrigerated lines, if that sits and it's not in use, it will foam up. And then when the bartender opens the faucet, something will pump through this area. Eventually it'll pop foam in their glass. They won't know what's happening. They'll stop. If they're pouring nonstop, they may never know. But when it sits, all it takes is a small section that's not refrigerated for them to have a problem with foaming. And it'll be intermittent. They'll complain about it for months. They'll say this hasn't worked since the day we opened. So it's really important for the installers to have access to all the areas that they need to work in. And it's going to be different on towers like these other ones Tom was holding up. This is going to have different areas that are being worked on to connect the lines to the tower. The restrictions are going to be a little bit different than a tower like these. So just something to keep in mind when you're on a job site, what dispensers, where are they going to connect? Somehow this trunk had to get pulled over to where the connection's happening, and someone has to be able to get hands on it and work in that space.
So these are the leader lines coming up here, and then you can see these clamps, and then this is part of the restriction kit that we have to put in, and that's what this is. So when we start in the walk-in and we jack up the pressure up to 45 psi to move it down the street, into the bar, up into the tower, it's got so much pressure, it's going to come out way too fast, it's going to foam. So we got to slow it back down. We speed it up, get it where it's going, and then we got to slow it back down to give us 1 gallon a minute, clear beer at the rack temperature that the beer was manufactured at. The way we do that is we got to slow the beer back down. The way it used to be done is they would take a section of 1/4-inch tubing, and if you had to slow it down X, you got 3 feet of it. If you had to slow it down Y, it was 6 feet or 7 feet. And that's the way you used to do restrictions. Perlick took a lead. He came up with the 1/4-inch, these 1/4-inch.
That is the tubing.
The tubing, and then there's some little pellets that go in there, and they stack in there. And each one of these restrictors drop the PSI X, and so you might put 4 or 5 in them. So this piece from here to here will have segments of restriction in there based on what we're trying to accomplish. And then it gets clamped and clamped. What do we double clamp the glycol?
It depends on what material. Some of them are clamped with 2 clamps. When it gets into larger areas, it's more than that.
Yeah. So, and that's how we get these in. And so you can't do them all at once because you can't have all these clamps in one ball. You're going to have a nest egg. So it gets in sequence up the line. And the same thing with the glycol line. They get clamped on so that you can get that connected and all of that. And I'll pass this around. That was just a huge innovation because you ended up with these 6-7 feet of wrapped glycol lines, restriction lines, and they got to be tied into the refrigeration part of it to keep everything cool. Kind of a nightmare. I think there's still a fair amount of people that do it that way. Mm-hmm. They're always trying to steal our swizzle sticks. So that's where these fit right here. These are the two beer lines right here. So he would bend these out of the way, probably snap them, and I'll sell them on Julian's job. And then they clap on here, and so you end up with a restriction, 12 to 18 inches. And if it's a longer setup, I think we have a picture of that, the one in here, where it's, I don't know, what is that, 24 inch or 24 line?
Yeah, that was,
Well,
Keep going.
keep going.
Keep going.
The large bundle of.
Yeah, so these are some of the, go back one. So these are some of the templates you guys get out on the jobs where they're trying to figure out where the holes go, how to match them up. Most of the time we'll go out and mark them for them. If the job's in Chicken Switch, Texas, we'd rather send you the templates and have somebody with 2/3 of a brain mark them out. But we can get those to you guys pretty quick. They're actually available online. Keep going. Yeah, that's just, again, this one. And that's probably 24.
I think it was 18, it's half of a big custom 36 product.
Yeah, but that's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of things getting connected to glycol lines and wrapped and insulated. And everything's got to be tight. One of the things we do, go back, or go forward. All right, so this is kind of what we do on, when we're designing the system. Somebody says, I got 12 beers. They send us a floor plan, we do some measurements. We've got to come up with some kind of routing, because normally there's not a conduit plan when we get the quote request. We get a rough idea what the line runs are, and we know how many flavors. If it's like a 10-line bundle, and I know it's going underground in a conduit, and it's staying within the footprint of a building, I know that the ground's pretty cool. So I'll probably do my calcs at probably 95 degrees, because I never want to be undersized. So a 10-line, 18.9 BTU per foot, a 100-foot line, 18 whatever, 1800, 1890. And then you've got some calcs for the faucets. Yeah, whatever it is, another 500. And then if the power pack's 20 feet away, I think it's 10 BTU per foot, another 200 BTUs. So we're at 3,600 BTUs. Keep this thing cold. And I always calculate also what's in the walk-in, because we need, I generally, if I've got an 8x10 walk-in, I do my distance to the walk-in, then I add one of each side. So if it's a 10x8, I'll add another 18 feet in there, because you got to sometimes get around the wall. And I still size that as though it's in warm temperature. So I'm cheating a little bit to make sure I got enough BTUs. So if I got 3,600 BTUs, I come down to my chart, walk-in, or the power pack's going on top of the walk-in, and there's not a lot of air moving up there. So I'm going to figure it's at 105 degrees, 3,600. I need a 4414. It'll do 4,050 BTUs. So I'm good. 4414 is a 3/4 horsepower. Done. Size it. And I've got some fudge because I've used 18 feet that I know is already cold in a refrigerator. So I've got a little bit of fudge factor. Sometimes I might drop it down to 95 degree if the power pack's like going in the kitchen, not on the walk-in. And it just comes out, you just find it on the chart, and that's the way we size the power packs. Not something you really need to be all that concerned with, just for your information. The next one's a little bit more relevant. It's the electrical loads. We usually feed that to the designers on the front end to make sure. So we got the power packs across the top. It's a third, a half, a 3/4, a 3/4, and a 1.5 horse. And over here we've got a single pump, a dual pump, and a triple pump. So if you have a 4420, which is our 1.5 horse, we have 3 sets of glycol lines going out. That could be 3 conduits, 12 lines or less, or a 12 line and a 16 line. Remember, the 16 line has 2 sets of glycol lines. Class has been called. We got to go home. So on the 16 line, we got 2 sets of glycol lines, and on the 12, we got 1. So we want to run a pump for every set of glycol lines. But what that means is the glycol goes out, cools down the tower, comes back, dumps into the bath, gets re-chilled, goes back out. And the second pump does the same thing. The third pump does the same thing. Some people say, well, can't we save? I mean, pumps are like $300, $400. Can't we just do 2 pumps? And the idea is on the 16 line, you send one out to the tower, you bring it back. You don't put it in the glycol bath. You loop it back to the next set of glycol lines and send it back out without cooling it to the next tower and bring it back. Then you put it into the bath and cool it. Well, for $400, it's not worth it because that one tower is never going to be as cold as the first tower. It's just not the way to do it. To save, literally, I think it's like $400. So we'll always put a pump on a set of glycol lines. The only time you really get iffy is that if we need 3 pumps, the only unit that we can get 3 pumps on is the 4420 and the 4414 230 volt. Those are the only 2 that we can get 3 pumps on. So if it's 3 runs and it's a short distance, I'm still probably going to a 4420-3 or the 4414 230-3. The trick is when you get 4 lines and it's a short run. That means 4 pumps. You can't fit 4 pumps. So now you're defaulting to 2 power packs. If it's a really short run, then we got to start deciding how we want to design this, whether we want to try to fit it all in one or just go for the second. Anyway, probably too much information to go over, but that's part of the design process to figure out what's going to work best on a job. And every job that gets out there that is a Perlick project, this material has been gone over to decide how to figure it out. Certainly in our territory, and most of the other territories for the Perlick reps as well. Storing the power packs. Obviously, on a stand is a good way to go. We need 15 inches above the coolant bath, which I don't think our Perlick power packs do. Why? I can't even begin to tell you.
The smaller machines actually have a little bit more room there, but it's not.
But the big ones, we make it work. That makes our life miserable, not yours. On legs, I mean, mounting the power pack's a big deal. Go back. So you see where it came through the wall. Power packs are always unthought of. Constantly. Where are they going to go? Well, I don't know. Where do you want it to go? Well, I don't know. Where do you want it to go? Well, up on the walk-in. Well, there's no room on the walk-in. Well, let's find a place. That conversation happens on probably 1/3 of the jobs. Well, just put it on that wall. Yeah, back it on that wall? No. Well, it's not going to fit. These wall brackets where the power pack sits on, I think we're about 24 inches, and that doesn't line up with the studs. It'd be nice if it was nice if it did, but it doesn't. So really, the best thing in our world is wood. 5/8, half inch, okay?
It's probably okay. It's just most of the time
5/8
they're replacing 5/8 drywall with whatever they're using for backing.
Yeah, so they put that in the drywall, but when it's up there, you don't see it. And in my world, the recommendation is just put in a 4x8 sheet. That way, there's some latitude to move around because the electrician's going to put the circuit right in the middle of what you want. We want 40 inches from the bottom of the power pack to the ceiling. That gives us that 15 to 18 inches above the bath. So when we use that dimension, it makes it easy because the dimension actually starts down here because that's where we got a drill. It's a little bit lower than the bottom of the power pack. But 40 inches takes care of everything. And again, I just say put in a full sheet of plywood and call it a day. Then you've got room to move it because something's going to get put in the way. Again, we're last on the job, so the wall get filled up. Might be the soda guy came out or the air guy came out, and they've taken up some of the real estate. Up on top, doorstop. I'm not gonna go into the engineering on the Arctic pour, but there's this thing going out there, where everybody's talking about super cold beer, 32-degree beer. And if you talk to any brewers, they don't like it. If you talk to people that do beer systems for a living, they don't like it. Part of the fragrance, or part of the beer experience, part of that flavor is from the aroma. I mean, it's like when you have a cold, you can't taste the food, it's because your nose isn't working. It's not all taste buds. Truly, the foam and the CO2 release is part of having a good beer. Now, if it's 120 out like today, you just mowed the lawn, for crying out loud, there's nothing better than a 32-degree beer. Okay, aside from that, if you're doing this for a living to sell beer for profit, and you give somebody a 32-degree beer, what happens when at 32 degrees, that CO2 is locked in. You're not getting any foam, looks like the beer's flat, and that CO2 is locked into the liquid. And what happens when that cold beer hits your stomach? You ever had that bloated feeling? You're burping all the time? You know, you've got a lot of CO2 release inside your stomach. And from a business standpoint, that means someone's going to order only one beer instead of two, or two beers instead of three, or you might have two instead of three and no appetizers, and you lose a lot of the flavor. So anyway, but it's out there. We have the Arctic pour system. We don't say we'll give you 32-degree beer. We tell you we'll give you beer that is 6 degrees less than your storage temp. If you're storing your beer at 38, we can get it to you at 32. If you're storing it at 37, we can get it to you at 31. Unless it's Coors Light, that freezes.
Under 30, it starts to.
Okay, under 30. Okay, I take that back. Sorry, Mr. Coors. But if it's at 39, we'll get it to you at 33. We did a job down in San Diego where they only wanted some of the beers at 32. And we did that. So the only reason I'm bringing this up to you is because this system is different. A power pack has the refrigeration system and the glycol, and we are taking the refrigeration deck and the glycol bath and putting them in different locations. So that can go up to 100 feet away, and this stays near the walk-in. That's where the beer's running through. Now, it is really best that this be installed inside the walk-in. If it's outside the walk-in, you've got to make some big bundles to keep things cold. So it's ideal to be inside the walk-in, which means you have to have a power source in the walk-in. So it just needs to be designed that way. Question? Okay.
Yeah.
And that can come off the same system. That same system can deliver 38-degree beer, the storage temperature, and 32. So when we run the glycol, we run it through the glycol bath. We are actually taking and running the beer lines through the glycol bath. Generally, they don't mix. Sometimes you might get a little Freon in your beer, but it keeps you warm in the morning. No, they don't mix. By the way, it is all food grade, so if something happened. But we're actually running the beer line through the glycol bath, and that's where we get that 6-degree drop. And for the 38-degree beer in this system, we don't run it through the glycol bath. That's how we get the split temperatures. So if you see that on the job, we'll probably already know it, but the refrigeration deck is going to go somewhere other than the walk-in, whether it's on a roof or in a storage area or what have you. We just need to, what do we do? Is it a wire that goes back and forth between the two, or is it just pressure?
There's a wire, so the blue and red lines running between the two pieces of equipment actually would have an electrical wire for the signal.
Okay.
That's all comes out from Perlick that way.
Okay, next. Yeah. I put a couple of notes on the last, so that when you get a copy of this, if you want to save them somewhere, if it's relevant for you, if not, throw it away. Just some things to look out for. There's another sheet on the long draw, direct draw. One of the things on the direct draw, that's where we run into a lot of the issues with the multitude of different products. You know, the milk and the teas and the big craft cocktails and all of those kind of things on the direct draws, although it's becoming more and more on the long draws. So what's the most important question when you ask somebody, when you go out today,
What do you sell it?
Huh?
What are you selling?
All right, we got another winner. Yeah, Starbucks, $10.
Let me say something, more specific, either what you're selling is, different kinds of beer are gonna have different keg couplers. Different, like European beers, American beers, and that, so you have to define it.
Yeah, and we never know that.
Now that-
Until the kegs show up, just
So the
about.
second job.
That is something, if you can get the information out of your customers before you order it, that'd be really, we can order them with
I
exactly
know,
what they need.
but you've got, not just the product, it's beyond that.
Yeah, in general, they're ordered with American Standard couplers. It's 90% of your products have those. And then when they start ordering their product and getting their lineup,
Do
in the
you have
bar.
those in stock, you just switch them automatically?
We do, normally if there's a couple of those that need to be swapped on site at the time of the startup, we can do that. But we typically tell them, or if you guys are talking to, management, on site, when they're getting ready to turn over and they're starting to order things, when they order their kegs of beer, tell their distributors to bring the coupler for that beer if it's not a standard American. So as long as the customer knows everything we have is standard American couplers, if they call Harbor and they're dropping something off that's different from that, if they're dropping off Stella, Guinness, anything like that, most of the time the distributors take care of that for free.
Yeah,
You just have to tell them when you're ordering the product.
For the project you're working on, you need to start talking to the operators now. And for the distributors for the stadium, they'll provide the couplers. And so Blue Sky or whoever's doing your install will just provide the hoses with nothing on them for the distributor to make the
Perfect
connection.
product, but I don't know. You guys involved.
yeah, I don't know.
Same issue.
Yeah, and, there's a lot of times we make things go away, because when we're doing the install, one of the reasons we started Blue Sky is a little bit more control over when and where and what jobs you go to, product being the most important, and we make things go away sometimes, and we can't make them all go away, but if it needed a nitrogen regulator, just pull it off the truck, put it on there. We don't want to go charging somebody for $86 for a regulator. If we price the installation right going in, we can make some of those things go away. And it always pops up. And sometimes a 3-pump panel doesn't work, and so he'll come and swap it out for a 2-pump and a 1-pump. And just so you guys know, outside here we have a full inventory of Perlick components. We have beer pumps, regulators, line sets, power packs. It's not all the Century system, but the pumps and things are interchangeable. So we like to make those things go away. We don't need to have conversations about that type of thing. Did we talk about forced carbonation on mixed drinks? The problem with doing 2 of these, you forget which group you talked to. Because I know I went over it, but I don't know if I went over it on this one. That's a funny thing. So we just got done with a job, and it was so typical. They wanted 13 flavor beer system, and then turned out, no, it wasn't 13 flavors of beer. It was actually 2 beers, red wine, white wine, and 4 mixed cocktails. In the 4 mixed cocktails, 2 of them were sparkling. Like a Moscow Mule needs CO2, and there's some other drinks that they want to. So you got to force carbonate them. We had no idea. Everything was set up for regular. Who's providing the corning keg? These lids come off, and you put your drink in there, you put the lid back on, you put your ball locks, you hook it up, it operates like a normal keg. So when you're doing these forced carbonation, you got to put your drink in here, take it into the walk-in. You have to have a CO2 system. You've got the CO2, you run the lines. You've got a separate regulator for this with its coupler set at 45 to 50 PSI. You hook it up to here, and you let it set for, they'll have a recipe for it. It could be 24 hours, it could be overnight. And then what you're doing is you're force carbonate this to like 40 to 50 PSI. So the next morning they unhook it, they take it out, they put it on the line set that's going to dispense it. Now you got a sparkling cocktail. Well, this particular customer was doing 2 of them, and they had 4 towers. So they're doing 8. Well, let me tell you, 8 is 8 more regulators. I guess you could probably split them.
Just if you had ordered a draft system,
Right.
that's not what you're getting.
Right, so we would have to get 8 regulators, set up 8 systems to do 8 kegs at once so that they could have them ready in the 4 stations, 2 at each station. Walk-ins are only made so big. And, you know, the 4 of those panels, we said about 14 inches times 4. Most of the time, there isn't that much real estate on the walls. And that's just an, oh, by the way, we're gonna do these craft cocktails that we gotta force carbonate. So they gotta have a dual system. They've gotta have a 40 to 50 PSI straight CO2 to carbonate it. And then half the time they want a mixed gas to send it. A blended nitrogen and CO2. Sometimes straight CO2, depending. But that's the stuff we need to know ahead of time. And by the way, that's what they do a lot of the teas and kombucha and things out of these pouring kegs. So that's it for this part. We have another little segment on fact or fiction. Get that?
I can't.
We've covered some of it already. I have some shameless plugs in there, but I didn't get them in, so I can't do it. One of the things that we offer, and this is a little side note, one of the factories we've started representing is Cooler Concepts, and they make custom keg shelving to the inch. It's a bit more expensive, but it's about 40%. And that's if you figure keg to keg. If you just take somebody else's 2 4-foot sections and ours that's been custom fit, it might look more like 60%. But if you go for keg, you get more storage. So fact or fiction? Matt Magliari, team versus home runs. We covered that. So we got that one. Maximum pressure on kegs, on the keg couplers. That's the weak link in a keg system. What's the PSI that this regulator is going to blow at? Huh? Oh, I heard it over here. Yeah, baby, in and out.
$3.
Yeah, that's good for 2 meals, $3. $10. So 50 PSI, some are a little more. So this is what a lot of, you know what they look like. They start out like this. Literally, these jobs come out and they want 30 beers and it's a 4x8. And it's like, what are you guys thinking? Well, some of them are going to be 6-foot. They're going to be 5-gallon kegs. Like, it's still not going to fit. And this is what's actually.
I think that's Pendry.
Who?
That's Pendry on the right.
On the right?
Yeah, that's the Wilson on the left.
Oh, that's the Wilson. Where is it? Where did I hear that? Where not to run trunk lines. There
That's
you
a
go.
really good question.
Well, that's where they go in the long run.
You don't want to go around the hoods, around the pizza ovens. You can't go through the elevator shafts. You don't want to be anywhere near a restroom. They've got so much plumbing going up and around those things, it's a nightmare. And hoods. We had a guy wanted us to install a beer line. He says, he gets up there and says, yeah, you see back there about 5 feet to that room? You can fit right through there. It's like, okay, can you reach that? No. I said, well, we can't either. Literally, it's pretty, so you don't go there. Apply pressure. It's too late in the day to even try. All that's telling you is temperatures and CO2 volume on kegs are a big deal. The one point we talked about in the prior session is we had a tennis club that one keg just would not pour. Couldn't get that beer to pour no matter what. And we ran other kegs through that line that poured great. That one keg wouldn't do it. So either the keg has some damaged components, the piece that goes down in the bottom of the keg, or the coupler on the top could be damaged, or the pressure, the volume of CO2 in that particular beer was very low, and it's hooked up into a dual system that's pushing too much, or has too much pressure on it. Really the only thing that would make sense. This chart will tell you all that. That's what it says. It tells you if this is the volume of CO2 in the beer, and if this is the temperature, this is the amount of pressure you need. These are what the guys at the factory get to plug in. I'm sure they have a computer program that spits it out, but that's what that does. One of the things, frankly, I think what we have done, when we design and put in kitchens, I think it's pretty awesome. I mean, they look great, they function. And every now and again, you run into a part of a process that maybe is lacking. And for me, and I'm part of this process, is keg storage and walk-ins. We do that more backwards than probably anything else we do. I've asked several designers, how do you pick the walk-in? Kind of what's left. That's kind of ballpark what the keg looks like. Yeah, kind of that size. There's no math to it. Nobody's doing anything. And what do we always put into them for shelving? 2 sets of shelves. Always. I've always done it that way. And we started selling Cooler Concepts, which makes shelving. And the first job I had, they designed it without a bottom shelf. And I was like, I don't know that we can do it. That's just wrong. We never do it that way. And then I started thinking about it and looking at it. Kind of made sense. So if you do, what's the big word they're using now with sports? All the information, all the science data they gather. Come on.
Metrics.
Huh?
Metrics.
Close to that.
Cybermetrics.
Something like that. There's got to be somebody in sports around here. Something like that. But whatever. No. I got $10.
I'll tell you later.
So these guys did an analysis with a guy that wanted to design his walk-in. Because what I've always told people is if you're going to have 30 beers, you got to have 30 kegs of backup. Who's heard that before? Right? That's what we do. So they did a Wednesday to Tuesday volume of beer you're going to sell. And what they found is beers 1 through 10, they sold 2 to 4 kegs. Kegs 11 through 20, they sold 1 to 2 kegs. Kegs 21 through 30, not so much. Half keg at the best. So do you really want backup kegs for 21 to 30? I mean, do you really need 1 of each? You need those front end beers to have maybe 2 kegs backup. For sure 1, but you really don't need to invest in the bottom 10. But more importantly, if you're talking about keg systems, and what I'm starting to evolve into is if you're using keg dollies on the bottom shelf in lieu of the bottom shelf, well, that's where you want your biggest movers. Because nobody's had to lift it anywhere but onto a keg dolly, and that's usually the beer distributor you get to do that. And you don't have anybody in the shop, anybody in the restaurant doing that. Put those bottom ones on a keg dolly. We know in our territory they can't sit on the floor. Put them on a keg dolly. A keg dolly is about 4 to 5 inches. And that bottom shelf has got to be 6. And then I think it's a 2-inch bar. So that's 8 inches. You just saved about 3 inches on the height. That's enough to get that top rack below my beer pumps. And I got my biggest movers on the bottom with a backup behind. The medium movers, you know, they're going to go in the most accessible place. And those dogs, they get kind of into the corners. I don't know. Something to think about. There is some data. Get back up. That's special. So the last thing is we do have some charts that actually show if you want to do X kegs, you need to walk in this size. So we're trying to get that out to the design community and the consultants and that kind of thing. This last picture, are you ready? Ready. Is absolute factual. Matt, come on up.
All right.
It takes talent to brew that type of beer. This was a month ago, 2 months ago?
The photo was from over a year ago.
Or a year ago.
We were on site a month ago and they're still using this
Oh.
system.
So that was a year ago.
But we confirmed a month ago they haven't changed.
And they're still selling the same beer.
They're still selling the same beer.
The country club.
Well, 15 to 20 years ago, in place of the gas blenders, they had some systems that were cheap and popular that ran compressed air and CO2 and blended the two together and used that to push the beer out of the keg into the wherever it was going. Problem with that is when people don't service their air compressors and when they don't put filters on them, you get rusty water right out of your air compressor flowing through all the lines into all the kegs, where it taints all the lines in all the kegs. And the whole time that's sitting there in the walk-in, that's all festering, and then stuff goes out to the bar, and people wonder why their beer tastes bad.
They also wonder why they have a headache the next morning. They only have one beer. I don't know. Did anybody have that? I mean, I hear it not all the time, but it's not uncommon that I have one beer that I feel like crap. Beer's thrown in the line. The lines aren't getting clean. Not necessarily that bad, but anyway. But yeah, that was an actual beer system, pouring beer up to a month ago. I'm not
So we
telling
don't go.
but I do know. I'm not even going there. Never mind.
No.
Let it go.
So anyway, anything I missed that you want to add?
I know I jumped in at the end of the last session, just real quick to touch on changes in design and equipment lists along the way from the beginning of a job to the end of a job. And one of the things that pops up every other install we're doing for draft beer stuff is what the customer initially wants, and as you guys quote start drawing up designs for, is not always what the end product is. So as things evolve and it change, you guys need to be aware that there's so many different types of equipment and different pieces of equipment that can work together, but don't necessarily fit in given applications. So if a customer starts out with a big boxy stainless steel draft tower and they approve the quote, start moving forward, and 6 months later say, I want something sleek and brass, it may not mount the same. It may not have the same requirements for access in various areas. And other than a change order and difference in cost in the parts, there may be a whole bunch of things that trickle down and cause a lot of problems when it comes time to install. So it's just what I want to throw out there is just be aware that when people want to change things, they may be changing more than they think, and it's something that needs to be looked at that time. It can trickle down to, as far as Tom was going over, the sizing system for the power packs. If you move the power pack far enough, you may actually get a power pack that's not sized properly. If you move it 40 feet away from the walk-in cooler where everyone assumes it was, you may actually get the next size up, which can change the electrical circuit, and it can change the way that everything functions. So just something to be aware of throughout the process.
Especially on the direct draws. Ask your customer what they want to dispense as soon as you can. If you ask the GC, they're probably not going to know. That's always the downside to what we're doing on new construction, is we don't always have access to the operators early on. If you find them or you run across them, or if it's an operator like Legends or something like that, they're usually much better. They know ahead of time what they're going to be using. It's better to ask, especially in the direct draws, because it's almost never all beer anymore. At least 50% of them are having a mix of different products. And then the question with that is, who's providing the corning kegs? Getting to the point now, who's ever providing the product want to provide the corning keg as well. But those are things we need to know.
So, briefly, this slide here that you saw has a little chart in the bottom that indicates number of beer lines and what the size of the conduit should be to carry those beer lines. We, as a standard, put 6 inches, but if you got a 10 faucet tower or a 12 faucet tower, now you just bumped up the size of the conduit. And since the conduit is always the first thing to go in the ground or get hung in the air, now you're chasing tail to make sure the right stuff gets hung. So as the project manager reviewing your beer systems, it's incumbent on you to get this information out there as fast as possible. Okay? The takeaway is that we have resources that we can lean on to help talk us through what an install looks like or what it should look like. As Matt said, when you add line run footage around here or around there, you're adding a BTU load to the compressor, to the beer system, and now you got to bump that up, got to bump up the electrical, so that's a coordination issue with your electrician. And these changes need to be followed and recorded so that when you get with the project executive, they can keep track of them. And, oh, well, it's not, well, you guys should have known, you're the beer system guys, you provided it, you bid it, you install it, you own it, right? We didn't bid it with a whole bunch of extra line footage, and those changes cost. okay? And it just is, you know, and we have to be wary of those dollars and who's gonna spend them, right? So most direct route with the conduit helps, and making sure the right conduit size gets put in also helps. All right. Again, Integra, Blue Sky, resources that we can lean on. You can lean on me as much as you need to. We do have a project manager that came out of Beer Systems. His name is Dylan Moore. Used to be a salesman for Micromatic, but he's on Trimark team now. You can lean on him. Many of you, I went over your skills assessments. You got the Google, you've got Integra, and you have the manufacturers as well. So reaching out and getting more information is a good thing. Don't think that you need to muscle it all yourself. Don't leave it till it's time to install. Okay? I'd like to say thank you to Team Integra, Perlick, Amy, who's Blue Sky, good day, successful, and again, Aloma for that wonderful lunch.